What happens when a lauded titan of technology, a man responsible for the digital privacy of millions, allows his polished veneer of progressivism to crack for one breathtaking moment? On a trans-Pacific flight, in the serene futurism of a private cabin, a globally acclaimed Indian neurosurgeon is called a monkey by the pilot himself. But this pilot made one catastrophic error. He had no clue the woman he had just debased was married to the visionary who owned the entire airline, and her husband was sitting right next to her. What follows isn't just a narrative of immediate termination. It's a tale of devastating karma, a labyrinth of conspiracy, and a day of reckoning that would rattle a tech-infused corporation to its very foundation. Stay with us. As we unpack a story so staggering, you'll reconsider everything you thought you knew about influence, prejudice, and the staggering cost of a single word. The atmosphere in the Zenith Airways Serenity Pod was a meticulously engineered calm. It carried the scent of bamboo, hinoki wood, and the faintest note of a rare 2010 Kagoshima single malt, being presented with near-silent reverence by a flight attendant named Kenji. For Dr. Anya Sharma, the sensory inputs were a familiar backdrop to the life she and her husband, Leo Sterling, had carefully constructed. At 39, Anya was among the world's most renowned neurosurgeons, her hands celebrated for navigating the delicate architecture of the human brain. Her skin, the warm color of sandalwood, seemed to draw in the soft, adaptive light of the cabin, and her eyes, dark and piercingly intelligent, held a universe of both scientific rigor and profound empathy. She was traveling to Tokyo to present the keynote address at the Global Neuroscience Symposium. It was a career-defining honor, the peak of years of tireless research, and Leo wouldn't have missed supporting her for anything. He sat across from her, his lean frame at ease in the plush, bone-white seat. Leo Sterling, the tech prodigy who took over his father's flagging regional carrier, Pacific Crest Airlines, and reinvented it as Zenith Airways, the undisputed icon of technologically advanced air travel. His tousled brown hair and sharp green eyes were a staple of tech and business magazines alike. But to Anya, he was just Leo, the man who still geeked out over old sci-fi novels with her, and held her with a gentleness that was the antithesis of his formidable reputation in the venture capital world. "To Dr. Sharma," Leo said, raising his hand-cut crystal tumbler. "The woman who is about to make the world's most gifted neurologists feel like they need to review their freshman textbooks." Anya smiled, a warm gesture that lit up her eyes. "And to Mr. Sterling, the man who ensures I arrive without my circadian rhythm getting scrambled." She tapped her glass gently against his. Their partnership was a quiet, unshakable sanctuary in a world that often felt cacophonous and chaotic. The flight, ZA7 from San Francisco to Tokyo, was their signature route, a testament to Zenith Airways' obsession with seamless innovation. The Serenity Pods were private cocoons featuring gesture-controlled holographic panels, fully flat beds made with Tenjin silk linens, and a kaiseki-inspired menu designed by a 3-star chef. It was Leo's vision, his rebuttal to the impersonal, friction-filled experience of modern flight. It was also, on this specific night, about to become the backdrop for a drama more retrograde than he could have ever coded. The first trace of dissonance arrived with the pilot's voice over the cabin address system. Captain Rex Thorne. The name sounded rigid, authoritative, like someone who demanded to be in command. His voice, however, was saturated with an almost performative swagger. He welcomed the esteemed voyagers of Flight 7 with a flourish that felt more suited to a talk show host than an aviation professional. He certainly appreciates the sound of his own voice, Anya murmured, taking a small sip of her whiskey. Leo chuckled, a low, resonant sound. Rex is an old-timer. He's been with the airline since my dad's days, logged more air miles than any pilot in the fleet. His technical record is perfect. He paused, a wry look in his eyes. Though his ego could probably achieve liftoff without the help of 4 fusion hybrid engines. An hour into the flight, as the California coast vanished under a sea of fog, a minor annoyance occurred. The sophisticated holo panel in Anya's pod began to glitch, throwing distorted, strobing images across the cabin. It was a tiny bug in the complex code of luxury, but it was disorienting. She politely mentioned it to Kenji, the young flight attendant, who immediately looked mortified. "I am so very sorry, Dr. Sharma. Let me reboot it from the central control," Kenji said, his voice a nervous whisper. He came back a few moments later, his expression even more pained. "Ma'am, I regret that the reboot is ineffective. It appears to be a hardware malfunction in the pod's projection unit. We can attempt to move you to another pod, but the cabin is at full capacity." "It's truly no problem," Anya said, her tone calm and reassuring, sensing the young man's distress. "I can just power it down completely. I'd prefer darkness to a broken light show." Kenji's relief was tangible, but just as he was about to offer another apology, a figure darkened the entrance to their pod. It was Captain Rex Thorne. He was a man in his late 50s, with a tanned, leathery face, a rigid jaw, and a ramrod-straight posture that seemed almost militant. He carried himself with an aura of absolute authority. "Having some issues back here?" he asked, his voice a low growl that lacked the polish of his PA announcements. His eyes, a pale, washed-out gray, scanned the pod, lingering a fraction of a second too long on Anya. "Captain, we have the situation under control," Kenji said quickly, stepping forward almost as if to shield Anya from his gaze. Thorne ignored him. He stared directly at Anya. "The boys tell me your screen is on the fritz." He used the word boys to refer to the cabin crew, a subtle but grating erasure of their role. "It's a minor issue, Captain. It has been resolved," Leo interjected, his voice courteous but firm. He didn't like the way Thorne was looking at his wife. The pilot finally pivoted his attention to Leo, a spark of recognition in his eyes. He knew who Leo Sterling was. Everyone at Zenith Airways knew their CEO. But he seemed to savor the chance to assert his own authority, the captain's authority, which, on a plane in flight, was absolute. "Mr. Sterling, an honor to have you flying with us," Thorne said, his tone shifting to one of feigned respect. "I like to personally make sure our most important flyers are content, a matter of professional pride." He then turned back to Anya, a smirk playing on his thin lips. "So, the little lady is having trouble with the interface?" The condescension was as thick and suffocating as smog. Anya felt a familiar, weary tension in her chest. It was the kind of microaggression she'd navigated her entire life, the subtle challenge to her intelligence, the patronizing tone, the presumption of her incompetence. She maintained a neutral expression, her voice even. "The projection unit appears to have malfunctioned, Captain. Your flight attendant handled it perfectly." Thorne let out a short, dismissive huff. "A malfunction or just user error?" He leaned into the pod, his presence invading the serene space. He reached for the control interface, his large, veined hand brushing past Anya's arm. She flinched, pulling back on instinct. "I assure you, I know how to power down a holoscreen," she said, her voice now carrying a sharp edge of ice. The pilot's smirk widened. He tapped at the interface for a moment, the lights continuing their erratic dance. He seemed to be relishing the spectacle, the small moment of dominance. "Well, These newfangled toys can be complicated. He looked from the flickering light to Anya's face, and then, in a low voice, almost a mumble, but intended for all in the vicinity to hear, he dropped the word that would detonate the calm of their gilded sanctuary. "Can't have the monkey getting scared of a few flashing lights, can we?" The word hung in the air, a toxic, vile pollutant. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the pod. Kenji, the flight attendant, froze, his face draining of all color. His mouth opened slightly, as if to form a word, but no sound emerged. The passengers in the adjacent pods, who had been speaking in low tones, fell silent. Anya felt as though she'd been physically struck. The blow wasn't corporeal, but it was visceral. A sharp, searing pain that shot through her. For a split second, the world seemed to judder on its axis. The luxurious pod, the fine wood, the rare whiskey, it all dissolved, replaced by a raw, hideous reality. She was Dr. Anya Sharma, a leader in her field, a woman of immense grace and intellect. But in that moment, to this man, she was nothing but a racist trope, a monkey. She looked at Thorn, her eyes locking with his. She saw no regret in their pale gray depths, only a flicker of cruel satisfaction. He had said it, and he had meant it. And then she looked at her husband. Leo Sterling had not moved. He sat perfectly still, his body rigid, his face a mask of stone. But his eyes were on fire. The sharp green had morphed into a glacial storm, a tempest of pure, unfiltered fury. He slowly, deliberately, placed his whiskey tumbler on the polished console. The small click of crystal on wood was the only sound in the suffocating silence. It sounded like the loading of a weapon. The silence in the first-class cabin stretched into what felt like a lifetime. It was a heavy, charged silence, thick with the unspoken horror of what had just happened. Captain Thorne seemed to comprehend, a moment too late, the scale of his miscalculation. The smug smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty as he finally processed the tempest gathering in Leo Sterling's eyes. Anya remained composed, her face a mask of stoic dignity. Internally, however, a whirlwind of emotions was raging. The initial shock was yielding to a profound, familiar ache. The exhaustion from a lifetime of navigating a world that, despite her accomplishments, still saw her race before her humanity. The slur was crude, a relic of a more openly bigoted time, but its power to wound remained timeless. It was meant to dehumanize, to shrink her into something subhuman. And for a fleeting moment, it had worked. Then she felt Leo's hand cover hers. His touch was a silent vow, a grounding force in the turbulent air. She squeezed back, a gesture of unspoken gratitude. They were a team, and the captain had just declared war on the wrong one. Leo rose from his seat. He didn't jump up. He unfolded his tall frame with a slow, deliberate grace that was far more menacing than any sudden move. He adjusted the cuffs of his simple, elegant black shirt, his movements precise and contained. He was no longer the relaxed, adoring husband. He was Leo Sterling, the CEO of Zenith Airways, and his kingdom had been violated. He stepped out of the pod, standing face to face with Captain Thorne. The two men were a study in contrasts. Leo, the embodiment of sleek, modern power, and Thorne, a relic of an older, cruder era, now looking more and more like a cornered animal. "Captain Thorne," Leo began, his voice perilously quiet. Every passenger in the front cabin was now openly staring, their attention riveted by the unfolding drama. "I think I may have misheard you. Would you mind repeating what you just said to my wife?" Thorne's tan face turned a shade of mottled red. He began to bluster, his arrogance returning as a flimsy shield. I was just making a joke. It was just some locker room talk, no harm meant." "A joke?" Leo's voice dropped another octave, becoming a lethal whisper that sliced through the cabin's ambient hum. "You think reducing a woman of color, a distinguished surgeon, to a racist caricature is a joke? You think that is the kind of talk we tolerate at Zenith Airways?" Kenji, the flight attendant, finally found his voice, though it trembled. "Mr. Sterling, sir, I can confirm what the captain said." His eyes darted toward Thorne, a mix of fear and resolve in them. Leo gave him a slight, acknowledging nod, his focus never wavering from the pilot. "I see. So it wasn't a joke. It was a statement of your character, a look at the real Rex Thorne." Thorne's bravado started to disintegrate. He could see his career, his retirement, his entire life flashing before his eyes. He attempted to backtrack, to salvage the unsalvageable. "Look, Sterling. Mr. Sterling. I apologize. I've been flying for 40 years. I'm from a different time. Things were different then." "A different time?" Leo took a step closer, compelling Thorne to take an involuntary step back. "Let me tell you about the time I'm from, Captain. It's a time where we don't accept bigotry. Not in our company, not on our aircraft, not for a single second." He paused, letting his words hang with immense weight. He then turned slightly, addressing the entire first-class cabin, his voice now ringing with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Leo Sterling, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Zenith Airways. I want to apologize unreservedly for the despicable behavior you have just witnessed from one of our employees. Zenith has a zero-tolerance policy for racism, discrimination, and any form of hate speech. There are no exceptions. Not for a data analyst, not for a flight attendant, and certainly not for the captain of this aircraft." He turned back to Thorne, whose face was now ashen. The pilot looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Captain Rex Thorne," Leo said, his voice cold and final. "Consider your employment with Zenith Airways terminated, effective immediately." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. A termination, in mid-flight. It was unprecedented. You can't do that," Thorne stammered, a desperate edge to his voice. "I'm the captain of this plane. You don't have the authority." "My authority," Leo cut him off sharply, "comes from the fact that I own this plane and the company you just disgraced." "First Officer Tanaka," he called out, his voice projecting toward the cockpit. "You are now in command of this aircraft. As your first official duty as acting captain, I want you to contact our ground control at Haneda. Inform them that upon landing, Mr. Thorne is to be met by security and escorted from the premises. He is not to set foot on Zenith Airways property ever again." From the cockpit, a young, crisp voice responded over the intercom. "Understood, Mr. Sterling." The finality of it was breathtaking. Thorne stood there, utterly defeated. The swagger, the arrogance, the lifetime of unearned authority had evaporated in seconds. He was just a man, stripped of his power, his dignity, and his livelihood, all because of one foul word. Leo turned his back on the now ex-captain and walked back to his pod. He gently slid the door shut, blocking out the stares of the other passengers. He sat down opposite Anya, the fury in his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice now filled with concern. Anya nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of a complex mix of hurt, anger, and a profound love for the man before her. He hadn't wavered. He hadn't made excuses. He had acted decisively, not just as a CEO, but as her husband, her protector. "I'm okay," she said, her voice a little unsteady. "Thank you, Leo." He took her hand again, his thumb stroking the back of her palm. "No one gets to talk to you like that, Anya. No one." The rest of the flight passed in a surreal haze. The news of the mid-air firing spread through the plane like an electrical current. The cabin crew, led by a newly confident Kenji, were exceptionally attentive, their professionalism a stark contrast to their former captain's conduct. Upon landing at Haneda, as promised, 2 grim-faced security personnel were waiting at the jet bridge. They escorted a pale and silent Rex Thorne away, his captain's hat clutched in his hand like a useless artifact. The story, however, was far from over. A passenger in the pod across from them, a vlogger with a massive online following, had discreetly recorded the entire exchange on his device. By the time Anya and Leo had cleared customs, the video was already igniting a global firestorm. The headline was explosive. Zenith Airways CEO fires racist pilot mid-flight after he insults his own wife. The world was about to learn the name Rex Thorne, and for him, the free fall from grace was just beginning. The video struck the internet with the force of a tsunami. It was raw, shaky, and utterly mesmerizing. It showed everything. Thorne's condescending sneer, the vile slur hanging in the air, Leo's glacial fury, and the shocking on-the-spot dismissal. Within hours, it had amassed millions of views. Hashtag Zenith CEO and had fired mid-flight were trending globally. The public reaction was a tidal wave of outrage and applause. Outrage at Thorne's flagrant racism, and applause for Leo's swift and uncompromising response. News outlets from Reuters to Al Jazeera picked up the story. Zenith's communications department, which Leo had put on high alert from the plane, issued a formal statement confirming the incident and reaffirming the company's commitment to creating an inclusive and respectful environment. The statement, written by Leo himself, was absolute. Hate has no home at 40,000 feet or anywhere else. For Rex Thorne, the public fallout was a brutal, relentless onslaught. His face was plastered across every news site and social media feed. His personal details were leaked online. He was branded the racist pilot, a digital scarlet letter he would carry forever. The Pilots Guild, after reviewing the evidence, issued a statement denouncing his actions and revoking his membership. His career, a source of immense pride for 4 decades, was not just finished, it was obliterated. He retreated to his cookie-cutter house in a gated Arizona community, a bitter, broken man. The phone rang non-stop with calls from journalists and people issuing death threats. He became a prisoner in his own home, the blinds drawn, the world outside a hostile, unforgiving landscape. His wife, a quiet woman who had stood by him for decades, looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. His adult children were mortified. In his isolation, Thorne's bitterness curdled and metastasized. He didn't see his actions as a moral failure. He saw himself as a victim of woke culture gone mad, a victim of a world that had changed too quickly, and most of all, a victim of Leo Sterling. He obsessed over the incident, replaying it in his mind, convincing himself he had been entrapped, that Sterling had used him to look like a hero. The thought of Sterling and his Indian wife in their world of innovation and influence filled him with a venomous rage. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Anya and Leo tried to find a semblance of normalcy. The Global Neuroscience Symposium was a triumph. Anya's keynote on real-time neural mapping in complex decision-making was met with a standing ovation. She was brilliant, poised, and inspiring. But the incident on the plane cast a long shadow. She was no longer just Dr. Sharma, the celebrated neuroscientist. She was now also the woman from the video, a symbol of grace under racist fire. She handled the attention with her typical composure, but privately, the wound was still raw. The slur had dredged up painful memories of her childhood, of being one of the few Indian children in a largely white town, of the countless subtle and not-so-subtle slights she had endured on her path to the top. Leo was her rock, a constant wellspring of support and love. But he was also wrestling with a deep sense of guilt. It was his company, his employee, who had caused her pain. "This can't just be about firing one man," he said to her one evening, as they sat in the penthouse suite of their Tokyo hotel, the city's neon-drenched skyline twinkling below. "This is a symptom of a much deeper disease. I need to find out if we have other Rex Thorns hiding in plain sight at Zenith." He was true to his word. The day they returned to San Francisco, he launched a full-scale internal investigation. He brought in an outside firm, a renowned risk and compliance consultancy, to perform a top-to-bottom audit of Zenith's culture, hiring algorithms and ethics training modules. He was determined to root out any systemic issues that might have allowed a man like Thorne to thrive for so long. The investigation was spearheaded by a sharp, relentless woman named Jasmine "Jazz" Cardenas. Jazz was a former white-collar crime prosecutor who had made a name for herself dismantling corrupt corporate structures. She had a keen eye for data patterns and a healthy disbelief in corporate platitudes. She was precisely what Leo was looking for. Jazz and her team began their work immediately, interviewing employees at every level of the company, from fleet mechanics to senior vice presidents. They audited personnel files, training logs, and internal communications. What they started to uncover was deeply unsettling. While Zenith's official policies were state-of-the-art, the on-the-ground culture told a different story. Particularly among the senior pilots, a cohort of men who had come up in a less diverse, more rigid era, there was a palpable undercurrent of resentment toward the company's progressive direction. They saw the focus on diversity and inclusion as a threat, an erosion of their long-held privileges. They had dismissive nicknames for the younger generation of female and minority pilots. They grumbled about the thought police in HR. Rex Thorne, it turned out, was not an anomaly. He was a product of this entrenched subculture. His personnel file was a testament to this fact. It was filled with stellar performance reviews and commendations for his technical flying skills. But there were also several red flags that had been overlooked or downplayed. Minor complaints from female flight attendants about his patronizing attitude, a written warning from a few years prior for making an inappropriate joke during a simulator session. Nothing deemed serious enough for dismissal, but a clear pattern of behavior that, in retrospect, was a flashing red light. As Jazz dug deeper, she unearthed something more disturbing. She found a series of anonymous posts on a dark corner of the web, an encrypted forum for airline pilots known for its far-right, anti-immigrant rhetoric. The posts, which her team was able to trace back to an IP address linked to Thorne, were filled with racist and sexist bile. He complained about diversity hires in the cockpit. He ridiculed the company's ethics initiatives. And he spoke with particular venom about Leo Sterling and his trophy wife. But it was one post from just a few weeks before the fateful flight that sent a chill down Jazz's spine. "The Golden Boy CEO needs to be taught a lesson," the post read. "He and his pet need to be brought down a peg. A little turbulence is coming his way. Stay tuned." This wasn't just the rambling of a disgruntled bigot, it was a threat. It implied forethought. A plan. Jazz realized she was on the verge of something far bigger than a single racist outburst. This wasn't just about one man's career ending. It was about the beginning of a conspiracy. The crushing karma that was coming wasn't just for Rex Thorne. It was for something far more sinister, lurking in the shadows of Zenith Airways. Jazz Cardenas felt a familiar charge of adrenaline, the same current that had surged through her veins when she was a prosecutor closing in on an indictment. The anonymous forum post was the key. A little turbulence is coming his way. It was too precise, too deliberate. This was not a spontaneous fit of bigotry. It was a planned ambush. She presented her initial findings to Leo in his stark, glass-walled office overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The view was panoramic, a landscape of technological ambition, but the mood inside the room was grim. Leo listened intently, his face taut, his hands steepled under his chin as Jazz laid out the evidence. "So you're saying Thorne's attack wasn't random?" Leo said, his voice low and tight. "I'm saying it was the opening act in a coordinated attack," Jazz replied, pushing a data tablet across the vast, reclaimed wood desk. "I believe Thorne was a pawn, a willing one, but a pawn nonetheless. He was coached, perhaps even incited, to create a public scene." "To what end?" Leo asked, his eyes narrowing. "To damage the company's brand? To hurt me?" "Both," Jazz said. "And to hurt Dr. Sharma. The attack was deeply personal, Leo. The word Thorne used, it was designed for maximum humiliation. They wanted to wound you by debasing your wife in the most public way imaginable." A cold, hard fury settled in Leo's chest. The idea of someone methodically targeting Anya, using her as a weapon against him, was infuriating. "Who are they?" "That's the multi-billion-dollar question," Jazz conceded. "The forum posts are anonymous, routed through layers of obfuscation. But Thorne must have been communicating with them. If he was the pawn, there has to be a puppet master." Leo leaned back, his mind racing. Who in his world harbored this depth of hatred? He had competitors, of course. The airline industry was brutal. But this felt different. This was personal. It smelled of internal decay. His thoughts turned to the old guard, the executives and board members from his father's time he had systematically replaced with a more innovative team. Most had left with generous exit packages, but a few had departed with deep-seated resentment for the young visionary who had dismantled their comfortable, homogeneous world. "I want you to dig deeper, Jazz," Leo said, his voice hard as tungsten. "I want every email, every encrypted message, every location data point from Thorne's devices for the past year. I don't care about the cost. Find me the puppet master." While Jazz and her team of digital forensic specialists began the deep dive into Thorne's encrypted life, the disgraced pilot himself was descending further into a spiral of paranoia. His initial rage had curdled into a kind of desperate self-pity. The media frenzy had subsided, but his life was in tatters. He was an outcast. His savings were being drained by legal fees. The threat of a lawsuit from Zenith for reputational damage loomed over him. One evening, fueled by expensive bourbon and a burning sense of victimhood, he made a catastrophic decision. He decided to fight back. He contacted a journalist from a notorious online publication known for its sensationalist, conspiracy-driven content. In his twisted reality, Rex Thorne was about to tell his side of the story. The resulting article was a tour de force of lies and victim-blaming. Thorne claimed he was the target of a woke witch hunt, that Anya had provoked him, and that Leo Sterling was a tyrant who used his power to destroy anyone who challenged him. He even hinted at a dark secret behind Zenith's shiny, futuristic facade. The article was laden with racist dog whistles and barely concealed threats. It was a pathetic attempt to regain control of the narrative, but it had an unforeseen consequence. It gave Jazz Cardenas the final clue she needed. In the article, Thorne boasted about a true patriot and family within Zenith who had been warning him about Sterling's globalist agenda. It was a minor detail in a sea of fabrications, but to Jazz, it was a blinking red light. It confirmed her conspiracy theory and gave her a new angle. Her team, working around the clock, finally decrypted a series of messages on Thorne's laptop from an untraceable messaging app. But the forensic experts found fragments, ghost-like remnants of conversations that, when reconstructed, painted a chilling picture. The messages were from a single, anonymous contact, codenamed Daedalus. Daedalus had been stoking Thorne's paranoia for months, stroking his ego, validating his prejudices. Daedalus was the one who had suggested Thorne make a principled stand on his next flight with the Sterlings. Daedalus had promised him financial backing and a new lucrative position if things went south. "They want to replace all of us," one of Daedalus's messages read. "It's time for the real men of the sky to fight back." The last piece of the puzzle snapped into place when Jazz's team cross-referenced the message timestamps with location data. Several of the key messages had been sent when Rex Thorne was at a very specific location. A highly exclusive private golf club in Monterey, a known haunt for the old money elite. Jazz pulled up the club's membership roster. Her eyes scanned the names: bankers, venture capitalists, corporate titans. And then she saw it. A name that made her blood run cold. Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne was Rex Thorne's older brother, a senior member of the Zenith Airways board, a holdover from Leo's father's era, a man who had been a vocal opponent of Leo's new vision, who had fought him on diversity initiatives, who had once sneered in a board meeting that Zenith was forgetting its base. A man with a reputation as a ruthless backroom operator. Jazz had her puppet master. Daedalus, the mythical craftsman who built the labyrinth and the wings for his son Icarus, was about to be trapped in his own collapsing creation. The Shadow Network was about to be dragged into the light, and the karma bearing down on Marcus Thorne was going to be biblical. Marcus Thorne was the living embodiment of old-world privilege, a man in his late 60s, with a mane of perfectly coiffed silver hair, a collection of bespoke suits, and a face that seemed permanently fixed in a state of smug entitlement. He moved through life with the unshakable certainty of a man who had never been denied anything. He was a serpent in a Brioni suit, his venom masked by a veneer of boardroom civility and charm. He had been on the Zenith board for 30 years, a close associate of Leo's father. He saw the airline not as a dynamic business, but as his private domain, a bastion of the old boys club ethos he held dear. When Leo took the helm and began implementing his vision of a modern, inclusive, global brand, Marcus saw it as a personal affront. He viewed Leo's marriage to Anya, a brilliant, powerful Indian woman, as the ultimate desecration of his friend's legacy. His hatred was a quiet, corrosive acid. He operated in the shadows, leveraging his influence to sow dissent, to undermine Leo's authority, and to nurture a culture of resentment among the old guard. He was Daedalus, a code name he chose for its sense of superior craftsmanship, believing he was the master builder trying to save his beloved creation from a reckless son. He never imagined he would be the one to get burned. Jazz Cardenas delivered the final report to Leo in a secure file labeled Daedalus. Inside was a mountain of irrefutable proof: the decrypted messages between the Thorne brothers, the location data, financial records showing secret payments from a shell corporation controlled by Marcus to an offshore account in Rex's name. There was even a sworn statement from the tabloid journalist who, facing a massive defamation suit from Zenith, had agreed to cooperate fully. Leo read through the file, his expression hardening into granite with each page. The betrayal was staggering. This wasn't just a business rival. This was a man he had known his entire life. A man who had been a guest at his wedding, who had feigned mentorship and friendship. "He targeted Anya," Leo said, his voice a low growl. "He used her to get to me." "He underestimated both of you," Jazz said. "He thought Rex's stunt would create a PR crisis, that the board would lose faith in you. He never imagined you would fire him on the spot and completely own the narrative. He never dreamed we would find him." The stage was set for the final act. This couldn't be a quiet dismissal in Leo's office. This demanded a bigger stage. A public execution. Leo called an emergency meeting of the Zenith Airways Board of Directors. The stated purpose was to review the final report of the internal audit into the Rex Thorne incident. Every board member was required to attend in person. Marcus Thorne arrived at Zenith headquarters, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He believed the report would be a corporate whitewash. He was about to experience the shock of his life. The boardroom was a temple of modern power. A long, polished table surrounded by floor-to-ceiling smart glass, offering a stunning panorama of the bay. Leo stood at the head of the table, flanked by Jazz Cardenas and the company's general counsel. Anya was also there, seated slightly behind Leo, a silent, formidable presence. Her attendance was a surprise to everyone, especially Marcus. "Thank you all for coming," Leo began, his voice calm and resolute. "As you know, we have concluded a thorough investigation into the incident involving former Captain Rex Thorne. The findings of that investigation are disturbing." He let the word hang in the charged air. Marcus shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "The investigation has confirmed that Captain Thorne's racist attack on my wife was not a random act," Leo continued, his eyes methodically scanning the faces of the board members. "It was a premeditated, coordinated attack on this company and on my family. It was part of a conspiracy, orchestrated by someone in this very room." A wave of shock rippled through the boardroom. The members glanced at each other, their faces a mix of confusion and alarm. Marcus Thorne's face, however, had turned a pasty white. The smugness was gone, replaced by dawning horror. "The conspiracy was masterminded by an individual using the codename Daedalus," Leo said, his gaze finally locking onto Marcus. "An individual who used encrypted messages to groom and manipulate a disgruntled employee. An individual who paid that employee to create a racist incident in order to damage this company's reputation and undermine its leadership." He paused, letting the silence stretch to an agonizing length. Then he delivered the coup de grace. "That individual is Marcus Thorne." He projected the decrypted messages onto the massive display at the end of the room. The vile, racist, conspiratorial words of Daedalus filled the screen for all to see. The financial records followed, tracing the money from Marcus's shell company to Rex. The boardroom erupted. The other members stared at Marcus with stunned revulsion. He sat frozen, a statue of disbelief. "Marcus," Leo said, his voice now filled with a cold, righteous fury. "For years you have been a cancer in this company. You've poisoned our culture with your bigotry and resentment. You conspired to destroy everything I am trying to build, and you used my wife, a woman whose brilliance you cannot even begin to comprehend, as a pawn in your pathetic game." He walked around the table until he stood directly behind Marcus's chair. "The board will now vote on your immediate removal for cause," Leo announced. "But that is just the beginning. The evidence we've compiled has been turned over to the Department of Justice. You will be facing federal charges for conspiracy, securities fraud, and witness tampering. The karma you so richly deserve, Marcus, is just getting started." Marcus finally found his voice, a desperate, strangled whisper. "Leo, please." Leo looked down at him with pure contempt. "You are a disgrace to this company, to this board, and to my father's memory. Security will now escort you from the building." 2 security guards entered and flanked Marcus, who seemed to have aged 20 years in 20 minutes. As they led him away, a broken, defeated man, his eyes met Anya's. He may have expected to see triumph or hatred, but what he saw was far worse. He saw pity. The pity of a queen for a fool who had dared to challenge her and had lost everything in the process. The serpent had been defanged. The shadow network was exposed. But the real work, the work of healing the wounds and rebuilding a culture of trust, was just beginning. The fall of Marcus Thorne was a seismic event that sent tremors through the foundations of the old corporate world. His ultimate fate wasn't defined by the swift execution in the boardroom, but by the slow, grinding machinery of justice that followed. Stripped of his bespoke armor, Marcus found himself facing a litany of federal charges. His karma wasn't a lightning bolt from the sky. It was the cold, unblinking fluorescent light of a legal deposition, the endless pages of his own hateful words, and the soul-crushing realization that he had authored his own demolition. Rex Thorne, the blustering foot soldier, met a similar fate. His patriotic stand had earned him a supporting role in a federal indictment. The money from his brother transformed him from a pitiable bigot into a paid conspirator. His pension was forfeited, and his name became a verb in the industry. To be thorned was to self-destruct with such spectacular, bigoted ignorance that you took down a conspiracy with you. For Leo and Anya, victory felt less like a celebration and more like the draining aftermath of a necessary war. Exposing the conspiracy wasn't a clean slate. It was the diagnosis of a cancer they now had to eradicate. One evening in their home, overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, Leo stood watching the fog roll in. "I was blind, Anya," he murmured. "I inherited the company from my father and put this beautiful new skin on it. But the rot was in the foundations all along. Marcus was part of those foundations, and I never saw it." His guilt was palpable. He felt he had failed to protect her from the institution bearing his name. Anya came to stand beside him. "This isn't your burden alone, Leo," she said softly. "But they see you as more than just my wife," he countered. "I've seen the messages from our employees, a young software engineer in Bangalore, a flight attendant in Rio, a junior pilot here in SFO. They feel seen because of you." That was the turning point. The thought of those unheard individuals resonated with the part of her that had chosen medicine. The drive to heal. A corporation's culture, she realized, could be treated like a patient. Diagnosed, dissected, and with a skilled hand, repaired. "All right," she said, a new resolve in her voice. If we're going to do this, we're not just closing the wound. We're performing open-heart surgery. Thus, the Phoenix Initiative was born, a direct challenge to the tragic myth of Daedalus and Icarus. This wasn't about flying too close to the sun. It was about rising from the ashes of a painful truth. Leo dismantled the archaic pilot review system, instituting a rigorous 360-degree process where pilots were also evaluated by their first officers and cabin crew. The centerpiece was a new, mandatory cultural competency program. Drawing on her scientific background, Anya helped design an immersive, intense curriculum using real-life scenarios. Anya also took the helm of a new, truly independent ethics and oversight council. Granted unprecedented power and an independent budget, her first act was to audit hiring data. Discovering a clear pattern of bias, she implemented a blind screening process for pilots and senior management, with initial interviews conducted by text-based simulators. The result was a dramatic increase in the diversity of candidates making it to the final rounds. She was a surgeon of bodies, and now a surgeon of culture. A year later, the scandal had faded, replaced by stories of Zenith's remarkable turnaround. The Phoenix Initiative became a business school case study on turning crisis into cultural revolution. Anya and Leo were on a flight to Sydney, a long-delayed anniversary trip. As they settled into their pod, a woman in a crisp captain's uniform appeared at their door. "Dr. Sharma, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Captain Eva Rostova. It's an honor to be flying you today." Her gaze lingered on Anya, a look of profound respect in her eyes. "Dr. Sharma," she said, her professional demeanor softening. "I was a first officer last year. I nearly quit. I didn't think there was a path forward for me here." She paused. "What you did, the work you've done since, it changed everything for people like me. Thank you." Tears pricked at Anya's eyes. As the plane began its powerful ascent, banking over the Pacific, she looked out at the endless blue horizon. The scar from that day would never vanish, but like the faint lines she left on her patients, they weren't marks of weakness, but symbols of survival. Proof that something broken could be confronted, healed, and made stronger. And so, a single, hateful word meant to destroy became the catalyst for a revolution. The story of Anya Sharma and Leo Sterling is a powerful reminder that while bigotry exists, it can be defeated by those with the courage to turn a moment of pain into a movement for change. The karma that found the pilot and his brother wasn't magic. It was the natural consequence of their own hatred, brought to light by people who refused to stay silent.